Okay, so now we've got quite a bit of this rig finished and it's all working together. One thing we really haven't tested or done a lot with is this global control. So we made this at the start so we had some sort of curve to add the IKFK to, and just so we knew where that global control was going to be, but at the moment scaling and rotating this isn't going to do anything. So what we need to do is we're going to set this up in this tutorial. So first off, we're not really going to want to scale the character in the X, Y or Z. We want to scale him as a 1-to-1 ratio, so we want to scale the X, Y and Z at the same time. You can leave these separate if you want, but you just got to bear in mind that when we hook it up to the arms later on, you'll have to hook up this scale X. So that way if you're scaling in X, you want to add that to the squash and stretch graph that we created earlier, and we're going to go into that later on. But I want this to scale as a 1-to-1 ratio, so all I'm going to do is go Edit, Add Attribute, and call it Scale. And it's not going to let us add that because you can see attribute already exists, because these do have a scale attribute already, so I'm going to rename this Global Scale. And just add that in. And actually before I do that, add attribute global scale. I'm going to give it a minimum of 0. So it's going to have no maximum, but it's going to have a minimum of 0, so we can't give it a negative scale and sort of invert the rig. And the default will be, of course, 1. Okay, so all I need to do now is go to Windows, General Editors, Connection Editor, and I'm going to reload this into the left and right. And basically I want the global scale to affect the X, Y and Z scale. So you can see we can no longer scale this with the scale tool, so if we want to scale the rig up we use the global scale. So setting the value of 2.7 in here is going to be 2.7 in all the scales. So it's a way that we're going to force whoever uses this rig to keep it at a 1-to-1 scale. And we could actually just select these scale X, Y and Z and lock and hide selected, so we can't ever get confused. We can't ever try scale it with the scale tool. We're always going to use this global scale. Okay, so what we're going to do now is set this up so we control this rig. So I'm going to select the global control and just hit Shift P, and I'm going to drag it back into the character node. And we've got this global move group which contains everything we want to move and scale. So we want to scale all the joints, all the IKs, all the control objects, and that's what's inside the global move. So this is why we've been ordering this in a certain way. So now if I do want to set up the global control, we've got everything in place already. We're not going to have any offsets. So I'm just going to go to Edit and Channel Controls, and I'm going to move the translate, the scale, and the rotate, scale, and translate, move them back over, and unlock them. So now we can constrain them. And with the global control selected, I'm going to control click the global move and go to Constraint, Parent. And before we add the constraints, you can see that the global move, the groups are in the center of the grid and the global control is in the center. So this is important. This is why we centered the character and made sure everything, the whole rig, originates from the center. So we've put the character in the center, we've created all these groups in the center, and we've created the global move in the center. So selecting the global control, control click on the global move and just hit apply to parent, which is translate and rotate. And once I've still got them selected, I'm going to go to constraint and scale. So now as we scale this up using the global scale, you can see it's going to scale that entire rig. Okay, so to see this with the skinning, what I'm going to do is just select the mesh and hit Control D hit Shift P and remove it from the group. So we're just going to skin with a duplicated mesh, and after we finish we can just delete the mesh because it's a duplicate, we don't really need it. And I'll just hide that layer. Now if the mesh, if it's not letting us remove selected objects from that layer, a fail-safe way that we can do this is if we go to Rendering Editors and Hypershade, and I'll just graph the inputs and outputs of this mesh that we duplicated, and you can see actually the layer is basically just a node, and all it has is a connection to that mesh. So I'm just going to select that connection and hit delete. And now we can see I can hide and show this group freely, and that mesh has been removed. So we're going to skin this with a default skin. So again, times JT BN underscore times to select all those joints. Shift select the mesh. Skin, bind skin, smooth bind. I'll just use the defaults. And I'm doing this because even though we scale the rig up, and if we can see these joints moving correctly, we always want to make sure that they're scaling correctly as well. Because if they're moving apart but keeping the same scale, the rig's going to look a bit different because these joints will move so it looks like the rig's scaling, but if the joints don't scale as well, it's going to look a bit weird because the volume of this doesn't scale up. So now we've got it skinned, I'm going to move up the global scale, and we're going to see a couple of problems. So we're going to sort these out as we go along. So the first problem we can see here is things that have the custom follow attributes, so the follow chest. So if we switch them off, we can see the follow chest, it works nicely when it's off, but when it's on, it's not looking good. We're getting double transformations. Double transformations means it's going to double it up, so you can see as we're scaling this is moving twice as much as the rest of the body. And that's basically because, if we remember, this is querying, this is taking its translates from the tie control, which we had in the extra nodes to hide. And if we just bring that up, this tie control in here, and we can see as we scale the rig, it's actually, these translate values are getting placed in there because this actual control is moving from its original position because it's been scaled along with the rest of the rig. So what happens is now this tie control gets translate values in, which directly get input into this upper body control, and the same with these antennas. So all we need to do here is in the extra nodes to hide, I'm just going to expand that, and here we can see all the tie controls. And I'm just going to reset the rig back to a scale of 1. So always make sure we're dealing with it, resetting it back to 1 before we start constraining things up. So I'm going to select all these tie controls and just hit Control G to group them, and it's important we group them in the origin. And I'm just going to call this the GRP tie underscore tie global offset. So now what we can do is, we don't really want these to be inside the global move because these are things tying the rig together, we just want them hidden away, but we still want them to be scaled along with the rig. So that means as we scale this, we also want this group to scale, so they'll be scaling at the same time, so this tie control won't actually get any translate values in there. So, and also we want it to rotate and move with the global move. So with the global move selected, I'm going to control click that new group we made, go to Constraint, Parent, Constraint, Scale. And now we should see, as we scale this up, using the global scale, we can see we're not getting those double transformations on those controls. So select the chest control, can blend between follow or not follow, and you can see, you know, it's not before it was sort of moving out here and these antennas were stretching up here. So we've fixed that, that's working fine. Now the next problem we can see is these arms are bending, and if we just look into the problem, we can see if we take the stretch off, that fixes the problem. But we want to be able to use the stretch even if we scale this character up. And if you can remember earlier, how the stretch worked is it divides the new length, so the distance between the start and end. So we can see this distance dimension tool. It's measuring the distance between the start of the arm to the end, and it's going to divide that by the original length of the arm. But if we scale the rig up, so if we scale it up by 2.5, the actual original length of the arm is 2.5 times larger. So this is why we're getting this problem, because it's using the wrong value to set up that scale rig. But if you can remember, we did add, and reset scale, we did add, and reset this as well, we added a multiply divide node as we set up those graphs. And we didn't initially connect it to anything, but this is where we're going to connect it now. So I'll just hide the extra to hide. Okay, so go to Windows, Rendering Editors, Hypershade, and in the utilities, the condition nodes were used in the stretchy graph, so we can just select them, graph inputs and outputs. And if we look at the top left of each of these graphs, we have an multiply divide left arm stretch global. So I'm going to move these both down, and this is what we created at the start, because we knew in advance that we were going to have the rig scaling up and down. So what this does is it's taking the original length of the arm, which was 18.696, and it's timesing it by 1. So what we're going to do is replace that 1 with the scale value. So if the global scale turns to 2, the rig's doubled in size, that means the arm has doubled in size. And then the whole graph here is going to be working with the double sized arm. So it's going to work in proportion with the rest of the rig. So all I'm going to do is select the global control, go to graph, add selected. And I'm going to middle mouse click and drop these onto the multiply divides, take the global scale and point it to the input 2x. Select the next multiply divide, reload right, input x. And we'll just close those two. So now we can see, if we scale this with the global scale and switch stretchy on, you can see switching between 0 and 1, we are getting no offsets. The arm is staying perfectly the same. And then we can also see, as we start to stretch the arm, we're still getting that exact squash and stretch. So this is exactly as we'd expect. So what we could actually do is stretch this arm really far out, and we can see no matter what scale we choose, the arm is staying perfectly the same. So now that stretchy rig is in proportion with the rest of the rig. And you don't want to put your scale to 0. So actually it might have been a good idea to, so what we might do is go to, let's go put the rig back to 1, put this back to 0, I'm going to select the global control, edit, and see if we can go to, so actually I'm going to select the global scale and go to edit, edit attribute, global scale, and this is where we can edit certain things. And I'm going to put has a minimum, and I'm going to put a minimum of 0.1. And this is because if you put your global scale to 0, you're essentially putting your entire rig in a singularity, and mine's not going to like that. You can probably rescale out of that, but it could cause some errors with your rig, cause things to flip out. So I'm just going to put a minimum of 0.01. So that way we can scale the rig down to a really minuscule amount, but never 0, so we're never going to get any problems. Let's hit close. So you can see, getting to that 0, we're getting an error. I'm getting like no rig at all. So edit attribute 0.1. And if it's not letting us edit this, what we could do is just recreate this attribute and hook it back up. So we're starting with, so go to edit, add attribute and recreate that, so we're getting that at a 0.1. But we can see that by creating this character node we already have everything in the correct group, everything in the correct order, and all we really needed to do was just set up a few constraints and instantly we have a scalable rig. One of the things we might want to check, you can see here scaling this up, this snail shell, because the snail shell's in the model, it's not getting scaled by anything, so again we probably want to select the global control, so I'll reset this back to 1. We probably want to get the global control, select the shell, go to constraint and scale again. So now scaling this up, we're not going to get any issues again. We can see here the sine waves. We can see everything's working fine. We get that funky sine wave going on, moving the global scale up and down. We're not getting any offsets there. So in hindsight, if you can arrange things in a hierarchy in your outliner, or if you prefer the hypergraph, you can use that, but keeping it in a structured way means when we start to do things like a global control, which is going to be dependent on everything being exactly in the right place and constrained in the correct way, we can see that it's been absolutely no problem. We've just had to set up a few constraints and everything's working along together. Okay, so I'm just going to reset these back to normal. And because we just duplicated this mesh and skinned with it, we've got no problem just deleting this mesh, and we've got the original mesh because we duplicated it across. Okay, so that's setting up the global scale. So now there's only a few extra bits we need to do.